Yes.
A novel start a little early. Good for me. Anyways, good for you too. Thank you for being here. How many people have been to a Passions talk before? No. Okay, I'll explain a little bit about it. My name is Jerry Taylor. I'm one of the Friends of Wellington Library. And this series has the intent of spicing up January, midwinter. It also has the intent of providing a forum for community members to describe their interests, their passion. That's where that title comes from. And I think also to contribute to the cultural life of the community. I'm only recently enlisted in this, but I can see its value. I have attended sessions in the past and found them very interesting. What I also find very interesting is how a passion doesn't necessarily fit with the identity you have of the person. For instance, you can't tell that I'm a passionate scuba diver. Probably because I'm not, but but there are, I have learned such varied talents in our community. I think particularly because we are in an aging demographic and people bring all kinds of experience with them. Today, our speaker is a hometown boy, for sure, for sure. Evan Nash, probably most of you, if not all of you, know of him, at least to see. But he's the hometown boy. He's born in Wellington, went to Snyder School, went to the high school in Picton, and he lives in Wellington. He has a family that's growing up in Wellington. But there's more to Evan than just that. Because Evan is not only a hometown boy. His further education included Seneca College, Toronto, a definitely urban setting. It includes also university in Brisbane, Australia. It also includes a stint teaching English in South Korea. His gap year between high school and college was in Sweden. So the guy's been around more than Wellington, but Wellington is close and dear to his heart. And he's going to talk to us about his ideas about Wellington. Originally, when I was trying to recruit him, I wasn't trying to recruit him, but I was recruiting him. I suggested, how about talking about Wellington then, now, and in the future? Oh, he said, I can do more than that. And he will. And I don't think he needs any further introduction. He also told me when I was talking with him that I have no trouble talking about myself. So I'll leave it to him.
It's my favorite subject. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I don't know how many of you remember when Jeff DeJong used to be the minister at the church up the road there at the United Church, and he said whenever he had a nervous group, he'd say, just make sure your fly's done up when you go out there, and the rest will take care of itself. So that's what I was doing. I was checking my fly. So I think I might be getting old before my time because I've started carrying around little notebooks with me that I write down my silly little thoughts in. And I had this one from a while back. It takes a sturdy person to embrace the Canadian winter. A person who has become familiar with cold, wind, and damp. It develops a certain hardiness, and there comes a time when you embrace it because it's familiar enough to feel like home. And I think that correlates very well to what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to try to weave together a few different things, but one of them is that we as Canadians are too polite to demand better built environments for ourselves. Our relationship with architecture and design is very mundane, and we have this sort of mediocre attitude that allows complacency, and because of that complacency, we often accept the status quo. And what I'd like to suggest today is that we shouldn't do that, because poor urban planning and poor design and poor built environment creates misery, and it creates disappointment, and it creates environments where people don't thrive properly. And so I want to talk about our built environment, and I want to talk about it from a design and architecture standpoint, but also from an urban planning standpoint. Before we get on to that, I just want to thank everyone here for coming, because this is why we're able to do this. We have this great public building here where we can come and we can share ideas and have a genuine human exchange that isn't on a chat board and isn't on the internet, and it's cold and it's the middle of winter, and thank you for leaving your nice warm home to come here. And so I was asked to comment on the future of Wellington in a handwritten letter left on my desk. And the letter sort of said, we'd like to know what you think about the future of Wellington, which is a big question to leave on somebody's desk in a handwritten letter. So I did have some follow-up questions, and I saw that it was about the Passion series, and I obviously am passionate about Wellington. I do hope that resonates with the things that I do and what you see me doing in town and the way I run my business. But if I was asked to talk about something I was passionate about, there's lots of things I could talk about: sports and art and history and geography and all kinds of things that I'm interested in, not to mention, my family and what's going on with the kids here. All of a sudden we've got a bunch of kids in town. Like, there's some great stuff going on. But I think what you really want to talk about today is what's going on with the future development of Wellington, right? Because that's sort of what the hot topic du jour is. And it's something that's poignant at the moment, so I think we should dive in a little bit. As Jerry mentioned, I did have the sort of the privilege of starting to travel young, and I've been interested in design and architecture for some time now, and there's a lot of crossover there when you start talking about the built environment. And having had the good fortune to be a few different places, was I supposed to do that? Are you good? That it's interesting how quickly you'll notice things that work and things that don't. So traveling a lot and sort of being interested in building has led me to also be interested in urban planning, even though I wouldn't have necessarily said that I was interested in urban planning. You're welcome to come on in and grab a seat here. And so the thing that we sort of need to note here, or the thing that I think we can all agree on, is that Wellington's a pretty special place, right? And if we have a plan, we can protect what is special about it, if you will. We know what we all care about here, and a lot of that is sort of the innate things, and we know what we wouldn't want to see happen, definitely. But sometimes it's hard to put your finger on what you would like to see happen. So I'm not by any means an expert in any of these things. I have no formal education in architecture, design, or urban planning. But I do somehow find myself involved in it all the time, and I think I'm starting to get the hang of it a little bit. And so what I want to do today is just tell you about ideas and sort of premises for good design and good urban planning that I've come across that sparked my interest, and I think would spark yours as well. And I mean, even within this room, there's probably enough people here that know what they're talking about better than I do with some of these subjects that I might be telling you stuff you already know, but at the same time, it's always good to go back and re-examine those things, because part of the way we've gotten to this sort of dystopian status quo is that we sometimes have planners or people working in higher up positions that don't go back and re-examine the design process and don't sort of continually keep up with what the contemporary ideas are. And by doing that, they're sort of limiting their ability to design well and to create the best things available. The other thing that's sort of pertinent right now is the Wellington Community Association, and I'm very happy to see some of the fellow members here. The Community Association is essentially a residents association, and my friend John Caliendo and I had this idea that we should start a residents association, and we weren't alone. There was a lot of other people that wanted to do the same thing, and so luckily we've been able to sort of get the right people in the room and start having conversations and form a residents association that is already up there doing great work, and I think in the near future we'll continue to do that. And it's something that was pertinent at this juncture that we sort of got this together if we hope to sort of have our say in what will happen to this town. So this community association coming to fruition and you know, becoming a real thing prompted me to sort of learn a lot more about urban design. And you know, so I started talking to people. Dan Leeming, for example, who's a great resource that we have here in town, and I had meetings with people, I talked to people, I read a little bit, I watched a lot of really great YouTube series that are fun and interesting about different places in the world and the successes that they have there. And I sort of come up with some things that work that I think would apply really well here, and so I want to share them with you today. And I think that we also need to sort of, at this juncture, acknowledge that being able to stand here and have this conversation is a privilege in and of itself. There are issues that exist in this community that we can certainly address with good urban planning and good sort of planning for our community. Affordable housing, you know, obviously is at the top of everyone's mind. But there's stuff going on here that, you know, the people in this room might have no idea about. There's different worlds that exist in Prince Edward County, and I used to drive a delivery truck around Prince Edward County, and I used to go to different places and meet different people from different socioeconomic echelons, and often would sort of realize that there was an entire group of people that existed right here that I had no idea about, and there was an entirely different group of people at the opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum that I would go to, you know, go to Long Point and drive down this windy laneway and get there and be like, did you guys know that there's 6 7,200 square foot houses right here that are all filled with, you know, talented millionaires from all over Canada and the US? Like, it'll boggle your mind, the people you find in Prince Edward County. But all that to say that there's stuff like food insecurity, there's stuff like affordable housing, of course, there's equality issues and that sort of thing that, you know, you can get the vital signs report and read it, and, you know, if you're the type of person who's interested in coming to something like this, you've probably already read that and you're probably aware of it, but there are other things going on, and we need to acknowledge that although this is a problem and we should be addressing it, we should be also working on that stuff. So if you ever want to talk about that stuff, I'm happy to do that. If you ever want to get involved in something, I'm happy to try to connect you to the right people. That is one thing that I'm happy to do, and happy that I have the privilege of doing in this community. But let's sort of get back to Wellington. In the last couple of years we've been working on, it actually has been almost 5 years that we've been working on the Heritage Conservation District proposal, but there was a big gap in there that sort of everything got lost during COVID. I sat on the committee here in Wellington, and I was part of it, and for those of you who don't know, there was a gentleman named Carl Bray who was hired, and his job is to help communities come up with their Heritage Conservation District bylaws and rules. And I was really grateful to see that his partner is a lady named Lindsay who actually lives in Milford and is a talented architect, but also a talented sort of architectural historian, and she has a lot of really good insight into Prince Edward County. Because it struck me as odd that this gentleman, Carl Bray, his job is to go to a place that he's never been, he's never lived for sure, and tell them what they value in their cultural heritage, which sounds like a tall order to me. I don't envy his job, but he was a consummate professional, and he was very good at what he did. And he and I had a really interesting conversation that I think surmises what we're going to talk about today really well, and it's the story of the front porch in Wellington. And so, you know, if we look across the street at the Queen Anne's, or the house I live in on Consecon Street, at the turn of the century we built great houses with great front porches, and what those front porches did was it was architecture where the form was informed by the function. And so at the time it was part of sort of more formal architecture that you would do this, but we can think of that front porch as the threshold between your public space and your private space. And so if it were a sunny Sunday afternoon and I was sitting on the front porch having a glass of lemonade, and my kids were there and my wife was there, and you came walking by with your dog, you know, I know everybody in this room. I would say hello to you, you would say hello, and we'd exchange pleasantries. And then if somebody who I knew a bit better came along, they might even come right in and come up on the porch and sit down with us. And someone like a letter carrier or a delivery person might come, and they would come up, but they wouldn't come up on the porch. They'd just leave the package and go. And the way we built the building informed how we were going to act. And of course, your family and your best friends in the world are already in your kitchen, and they're trying to go through your fridge and find out what you have and get some beer and all that sort of thing. So we got away from that at one point, and what we lost there was not only the comfort that building a building that informed the way you were to use it worked for you as the building owner, where you could feel comfortable that people weren't going to be invading your space inappropriately, but it also took away the opportunity for someone who was a guest on your property to sort of know how they were supposed to act. So if you're somebody who's shy or not sure how to behave in social situations, often the built form can inform how you're supposed to interact with that building and therefore interact with the people in that building, and it can take the guesswork out of it, which actually makes you more comfortable. In the same way that we all came into this room today and you knew where to sit and you know where the washrooms are and you're comfortable in this space, we did that with our homes at one point. And I would suggest that if we could do that with a village or what will be a town, we create a better opportunity for our community to thrive in that space. And it's interesting, when you've lived in Wellington your whole life like I have, and luckily I've been other places, but I would have totally taken for granted the walkability of this town and the way that I can walk to the post office and back and say hello to everybody that I meet because I know them. And that's not something that occurs everywhere, and if you don't sort of realize what a gift that is, you may sort of lose out on it. And so that intangible relationship that we have with this town is something that we need to sort of protect, but also consider it as a resource that we need to add to this village as it expands to make sure that we don't end up fighting over the resource that we do have, right? It's going to become a more scarce resource if we don't allow for it as we develop. And so we want to use our development to correct issues that we have, and certainly this small town has lots of urban planning issues and lots of other issues, but we also want to use the development to protect what we have, and if we do it right, it could be really great, and if we do it wrong, could lead to sort of some issues that we hadn't seen. So I'd like to sort of tell you about some of the ideas that I have and the ideas that I was interested in, and see if we can't sort of employ some of them as we move forward. But in the interim, just before we do that, I wanted to talk just a little bit about myself and what I'm passionate about, which is architecture. And so you all know me here. I wasn't sure who was going to be here, so I wasn't sure who how to talk about this. But I have a young family. I have 2 kids under 7 years old. My wife just actually moved to teach at CML, so she teaches in town now, which is awesome for us. And my family's owned a hardware store for 120 years, and so I owe everything I have to this town. I think that this community deserves the best because this is a community that has invested in itself for a lot of years, right? So we have people here that will take the time and put the effort into looking after our common spaces, looking after our beach, looking after our ball diamonds, doing all those things. And I think that by our nature here in Prince Edward County and in Wellington, I often use the analogy that we were sort of on this rock by ourselves for a lot of years with nobody paying attention to us, and so we just learned to look after ourselves because if we didn't do it, nobody was going to do it for us. But it created a culture where we did reinvest in our community quite heavily, and we looked after ourselves and we looked after each other. And the fact that we did that for so many years and did things like built an arena, that was a community effort to build that arena. That we look after the beach, that the Rotary Club takes on what it does, that Barry looks after the Millennium Trail, like those sorts of things are the reason that we deserve to keep it up. We've done the work and we deserve to reap the rewards from it. My grandmother on my mother's side had a travel agency in the 60s, and I often have quipped that I find it very impressive that she was a female business owner, a female entrepreneur in the 60s when that probably wasn't such an easy thing to do. And her response to that was, well, I wanted a business, so I got a business. And it's probably how she got the business, right? She wasn't going to take no for an answer. But it was pounded in my head from a very young age that you need to go see the world. You need to travel. The list of places she hasn't been is much shorter than the list of places. Like if you ask her where she's been, she lists the places she hasn't been because that's an easier conversation. And so we were taught to go out and sort of look around and explore a little bit. And so when I was 18, I took the opportunity with the Rotary Club to become an exchange student, and I moved to Sweden, which I would recommend to any 18-year-old boy. The Swedes obviously have, Scandinavian design is world renowned, and they have great, clean, beautiful, warm, comfortable design. But what really struck me and what I noticed the most when I moved there was that the urban environment and the built environment that they lived in was conducive to a better, healthier lifestyle. Like I lost 30 pounds in the first 3 months I lived there because I rode my bike everywhere, and I ate really good quality school meals. Like there was lunch provided at school, so I ate a good meal instead of eating some junk food. And the buses ran on time, and I went to school in a really beautiful building that was not only a great place to learn, but a nice place to congregate with people, and it was a social hub as much as it was an educational facility. And I played soccer on a team for free, and I did all these things that just to them were normal and to me seemed so crazy. And then from Sweden I came back and I went to Seneca College in North York, and I don't know if you know where it is, but the main campus is at 404 and Finch. And it was the polar opposite of that. It was an absolute nightmare to try to take a bus or to do anything. And we were 30 kilometers from downtown Toronto, and I say I went to North York to go to school, not to, and I'm sorry if you're from North York, I'm going to get a bag on it here for a minute, but I went to school in North York. I didn't go to school in Toronto because I hardly spent any time in downtown Toronto because it was an hour and 15 minutes minimum to get down there using public transportation, and maybe the bus would show up and maybe it wouldn't, and then I got off a bus and I walked through a parking garage and across a couple parking lots, and then I got on a subway that took you to another subway that took you to another subway, and it just wasn't worth it. And what that meant was we became really insular. Like I lived in a frat house, I lived in the residence, and we kind of just stayed there, and the only time we went out was there was one bar nearby and there was a grocery store kind of thing. So that's what we did. And so seeing the juxtaposition between the two certainly got my wheels in motion about, what was great about Sweden and what was terrible about how I was living in Toronto. And the funny thing is Toronto's actually a pretty good city for public transportation based on, what you get in North America. From there, I studied international business, and I studied, I got 2 diplomas, one in international business and one in business management, and that allowed me to move into a course at either Ryerson for 2 years to finish my degree, or I could go for 1.5 years to a place called Surfers Paradise in Australia, and guess which one I chose. So Surfers Paradise is sort of the coastal suburb of Brisbane. It's about 40 minutes out, and think of Myrtle Beach, like it's a totally plastic tourist town. But they still had better built infrastructure than we did in Toronto, and it was actually, once you were past the sort of like, stay off the main tourist strip and you got to sort of know some people and how the city worked, it was actually a really nice place to live. And I took a reliable bus route back and forth to school, and I had a friend who lived on the beach, and I observed things like in places where it was uncomfortable to walk because there was no trees, well, they put up sunshades. And the people had sort of thought about the built environment a bit more. And I had a really good time there, and my wife came and joined me. She wasn't my wife at the time, but she came and joined me. She was finishing Teachers College in Ottawa, and she came down, and then we traveled to New Zealand after that, and we lived in a van and we drove around, and I could talk for an hour about that. But similar thing in New Zealand, where facilities were there for people to enjoy the outdoors, particularly. They had a great relationship with the natural environment there. And after that sort of footloose and fancy free lifestyle, we moved to Seoul in Korea, which is one of the world's biggest cities. And again, I found there was reliable public transportation, and getting around wasn't a problem. And so it certainly influenced the way I thought about the way we do things and the way you can move people if it's not sort of snubbed that you should be driving your car, by showing up on public transit. That's a lower class thing to do, or you're not just a poor student riding the bus. It's totally acceptable to ride the bus. And it also showed me an interesting thing about the many ways there's multiple solutions to a problem that are all correct. My best friend is a professor of architecture at the University of Toronto, and he turned me on to that idea a long time ago. I was always sort of, when I was designing stuff or trying to lay stuff out, I was trying to find the right answer, and he finally beat it into my head that there's 100 right answers. Like, you can design a bedroom 101 different ways. But he's like, the thing to be worried about is the fact that there's 300 wrong answers, and you don't want to get one of those. And so that is true of design, it's true of building, and it's true of urban planning, I would say. So there's a lot of ways we could get it right as we move forward. There's also, unfortunately, a lot more ways we could get this wrong. And as that correlates to design, I understand that architecture in this country is pretty esoteric. It's an academic pursuit, and I think people who pursue it academically like to keep it that way because then they have less people to compete with, if you will. And so what happens is we don't develop the right type of relationship with design because it's intimidating. You might be asked to defend your opinion against somebody who knows considerably more than you or can reference, in a more academic way, good precedent for building. You also might find that it's expensive, or it's something that, you have a great idea, then come to find out, well, the building code doesn't allow for that, or something like that. So there's a lot of things that make design difficult in North America and in Canada. And the interesting thing is that everybody still loves design. HGTV is on 24-hour loops of people redesigning houses for a reason. We all love it. We just aren't sure how to approach it. And what that sometimes ends up doing is leading to really bad design getting more attention than it should. And I'm going to tell this story that I use as an analogy a lot. And it's a stereotype, but I want you to understand I don't normally think in stereotypes, but it works really well for this. So picture the old guy, he's retired, he lives, in a wartime bungalow, and he's never cared about the interior of his house or the exterior. He keeps it up, he does the maintenance, but he's never picked a wall color. His wife's picked every wall color, and he's, he'll paint if she asks him to, but he's not going to go take the initiative to do that. And it's the exact person you're thinking of right now in your head. And that person sits in their ugly lazy boy, and they watch TV, and they do their Sudoku, and they do whatever their activities are, and they have a perfectly happy life. And they have a lamp beside them, and it's just a lamp. It's the lamp that's always been there, and they have no relationship with this lamp. But if you went into their house and sat down and said, "That is the ugliest lamp I've ever seen," his feelings would be hurt. He'd be insulted by that. And he didn't care about that lamp until you insulted it, but now he cares about that lamp because it's part of his built environment, it's part of the way he interacts with the world, and his defense would be, well, it's a perfectly fine lamp. I turn it on, I can see my crossword puzzle, and away we go. The flip side of that is that same old guy is walking down the street one day, and it's a sunny day, and he's feeling good, and the neighbors are having a yard sale, and they've got a lamp for sale for $3, and he takes a look at it, and he says, I like that lamp, and he buys it, and it's an ugly lamp and whatever, but he likes it because he bought it, and he takes it home, and he gets rid of his old lamp, and he plugs that one in, and he's going to smile every time he turns on that lamp because it's his contribution, right? And so that's how you can shape your lived experience, right? And that's a really simple analogy, and I've done small things like that my whole life, and I've done some bigger things, obviously. And I've had, big projects, I've had smaller projects, I've had the resources available to me and the willingness to sort of do it, and, sometimes I didn't have the willingness and I didn't have the resources, but I was in over my head, so I had to make it work anyway. And And you don't have to be sort of in like I am, where it's like something that consumes me all the time and I'm taking on huge build projects all the time. You can give yourself the gift of a little bit of your time and energy into design around your home or your built environment, whatever that may be, and it might be something that's a group that you contribute to or something like that. And it doesn't even have to cost you a lot of money or anything. I mean, you can go home tonight and put on some music, or while you're watching Jeopardy, and just move some furniture around, or paint a wall, or move your pictures around or something, and feel instantly better about where you're living. And as a person who sells design, it's the hardest thing for me to communicate to somebody who hasn't lived in a bespoke space, but when you live in a space that you've had input into or that has been thoughtfully and purposefully built, your day is 10% lighter all the time. When my kids are in bed and my wife's gone to do whatever she's going to do, and it's just me in my house, and I turn off all the lights and I put on the mid-level lighting and I sit down in my house, there's an immediate sense of peace, and I don't have the urgency to fix or change or do anything, because it's exactly how I want it. And I understand that it's not necessarily in everybody's reach to be able to sort of control the entire house around them, but you can certainly and very easily control what painting you look at all day, or change the color of your light bulbs, or paint a wall, or anything like that. And by giving yourself the sort of time to tinker around and paint or change something or mess around with stuff, you'll start to feel and realize that you've contributed, and you want to contribute a little more, and you want to contribute a little more. And hopefully you don't end up like me, where you're like, oh, I just tore the back off this house and now I got to build something here. But it's a funny thing to me that we don't mess around with stuff that much, because it's such an easy gift to give yourself. So when I lived in that apartment in Seoul, Korea, it wouldn't have been 600 feet. It wouldn't have been the size of this room that we're sitting in right now. And we had bedroom, dining room, kitchen. We had on-site laundry. We had a bathroom. And my wife and I shared it. And she was very happy when I decided, oh, I'm going to go skateboard for a couple hours. And she'd be like, see you later. Don't come back for 2 hours, we promise. We put a lot of effort into that little place that we had, and we would, we'd pick up garbage furniture off the side of the road, and the first thing I do when I move to a place is go buy some tools. So we fix stuff up, we'd paint it a little bit, we'd make art, we'd collect stuff from our travels around that area, but then also stuff that reminded us of home, and we just put a bit of effort into it. And what we noticed was it very quickly became the place that all our friends wanted to come. So if not only did we have a good location, but if it was time to meet up before we went out or do something like that, everybody always wanted to come to our place. And it occurs to me that it was because we had put some effort into it. We had created an environment that was nice to be in, and by doing that, more people would want to actually come there and spend time there. My design partner, one of the things that he taught me that I love is when we design a building or a space, if I took everything out of that room and painted it gray and left the windows as holes where they were, would it still be a nice place to sit? Would the sun still interact with it properly? Would the breeze still work? Because you know what's going to happen? The kitchen cabinet colors that you chose, they've gone out of style, but I can swap those back in, and if the sense of place is right in a building, then you'll always want to be in that building, and you can adapt it as you go, and that's what I think really good architecture does. And so I'm not going to stand here and sort of tell you what I love about architecture, or what my favorite types are, or why I think certain things are good and certain things are bad, because it doesn't matter. What matters is that we can use thoughtful prescriptions to sort of create a built environment around us that will work better for everyone or for the users, and we can apply that same line of thinking into the way we build our town. And so we're kind of halfway in now, and what I want to do just for the rest of the time is talk about Wellington and talk about what the built environment here could stand to win and lose with. And again, I have no formal training in this, so these are just ideas that piqued my curiosity, but I found that, as Dan and I mentioned, it's not even that these ideas are simple, it's that they're common sense. But until you say it out loud and think about it and think, well, why don't we do it that way? sometimes they'll just pass you by, and sometimes we will just use the status quo, and you know, Shire Hall's planning department, and I'm not critiquing them because I actually think they're doing a reasonably good job, but they'll do the thing they've always done because that's how they do it, and that's what we all do in our jobs, right? Is eventually you sort of are like, well, look, I've done this, I know how to do that. And there's rules about what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So they'll take the path of least resistance, and they'll just sort of design what has always been there, or the way sort of things are designed today, and they may not actually be the best way to do it. And so by putting a little pressure on to sort of examine this more critically, we may come up with something a little bit better. And so I think what we could gain through this process is a lot of solutions to our problems, and we could gain an additional portion of our village that has the same innate and sort of community-led heritage that we love about this place, without turning it into a suburban hellscape is what I want to say, but I won't say that out loud. So without turning it into something homogenous and commodified. There was another interesting thing that happened during the Heritage Conservation District planning, where we talked a lot about the buildings, and nobody wants us to tear down the town hall and put an Arby's there. Like, of course not, right? Like, we all love the beautiful buildings and the social hub that this creates, and we have this stupendous relationship with the lake. And I mean, if you live in Wellington and don't stand in awe of the lake every once in a while, like, what are you're missing out the point on living here. But the other thing that I would argue is that there is a cultural heritage here that is just as important as the buildings, and that cultural heritage is the bit that I alluded to earlier about us having invested in this community. So what can we do there that emulates that will lead us to better sort of ideas? So I think the first thing to do is to identify the users of Wellington. And so the users of Wellington, in my opinion, are seniors. We have a probably disproportionate number of seniors that live in this town. There's young families all of a sudden, which is great. We have an influx of young families. There's the workers, the people who come here for work, the proletariat, if you will. And then there's tourists. And you know, as much as the tourists might drive us crazy, we do want them here, and we do want them to come and stimulate our economy. We just don't want them to use up the resources that are scarce and getting scarcer, and we don't want to have to fight them to use our own town, right? We want them to be able to come and enjoy it, and us to also be able to enjoy it at the same time. And so the funny thing about a lot of these people, aside from tourists, is they all kind of want the same thing. Young families want small, affordable houses that they can get their start with. Seniors want small, affordable houses that they can end their career with and live in and not have them be a burden on themselves. And what we get is large, single family dwellings that are detached, and we don't get condos, and we don't get sort of all the other things that we'd like to have. And there's a lady who lives on my street who I really like, and I know she would love to move out of her house because it's just, she's on her own now, it's a little bit too big for her, the gardens are a little too much, and she always kept them up so nicely, and you can tell it kind of hurts her pride that they aren't as well kept as they used to be. And she'd like to move into like a condo or an apartment, but there aren't any here for her to move into. And so, you know, yeah, maybe she could find something she liked in Picton, but that's not where her life is, and that's not where her resources are, and that's not where her friends and family that she can rely on live. So I feel for her because she's kind of stuck. And so when we think about what we could develop, we need to think about what we have and what we're missing. The next concept I want to go into is something called the third space. And so the third space is the Tall Poppy Cafe. And so if you remember the Tall Poppy, it was this phenomenal restaurant where you went in and you sat with everybody and you ate really healthy food. And there was a corner with toys and the kids would sit there, and when mom had to go to the bathroom, she'd hand the baby to the two little old ladies sitting having tea there, and she'd go to the bathroom and it would be totally fine, and she'd come back and get the baby. And we didn't know how good we had it when we had that. And you know, we've got Midtown Brewing now and they do a similar thing, but the third space is not your place that you work and not your place that you live. And the analogy that when I learned about it, the gentleman used was Cheers, right? So the story of Cheers the bar was a psychiatrist and a postman were best friends, and normally they wouldn't be, right? If you live in a suburban landscape, oftentimes you're grouped in with people that are from the same socioeconomic background as you. You know, you maybe have similar age, similar family dynamics, and so what the third space allows us to do is to have a place to live our lives where we will find a community that we might not be automatically slotted into. And what that actually does for us is gives us more opportunity for romantic connections, to find jobs, to find new interests, to find people that, you know, may have resources to share, or for us to be able to share our resources and find fulfillment that way. So without really good third spaces, it's really hard to form a viable community. And we are so blessed in this town to have so many of them, right? We built ourselves an arena, we've got a great town hall, we have this kind of really neat social hub that is the churches, the school, the public park, the downtown, everything's here that we need to be able to sort of enjoy our town. And again, I don't think we realize how lucky we are to have it this way, right? So if you're going to develop something new, how can we incorporate really useful third spaces into it? And those could be a splash pad, or a public swimming pool, or just parks, or even just streets that are wide enough to have proper cafes on and things like that. And we're going to sort of loop back to that in a second. Because if we do this right, we can build something that we can afford and that will satisfy some of these itches. And if we do it wrong, we're trapped in the existing way that people build things, which is kind of a Ponzi scheme. Without perpetual growth, a lot of Canadian cities die, right? Like, if you look at London, Ontario, or Pickering, or Whitby, or any of these sort of city centers that have these large sprawling suburbs that come off the side of them, those are really inefficient and they're really expensive. And if they don't keep growing, they can't afford to keep them going. And so what you'll find is the way we build things now with strip malls, and I think we'd be hard pressed to find anybody who wants us to, you know, line Belleville Street with strip malls, right? But if you build destinations where you've got a parking lot the size of a city block with a McDonald's built in the center of it, that building can only ever be a McDonald's. That's what it was built for, that's how it works. If you take that same city block and you remove the parking, or you put the parking in behind, and you bring the building up to the street and you put flexible commercial units in it, and you put maybe some residential space above it, and I mean, this doesn't work if we're trying to put a foundry in, right? But it works if you're putting a cafe in or an office space. You've created some flexible little units that can be what we need them to be, and they can grow with our town, and it will create opportunities for things that we didn't even know we needed, you know? And so people who want to move here that have young families that need some office space all of a sudden say, okay, well now they have some office space and I could come and rent some of that, or I could buy a building as my first sort of investment that has an apartment above that I can live in, and I have my commercial space on the ground floor. And that same city block with 3 or 4 of those units with residential buildings above will garner so much more income for the municipality than that parking lot with an Arby's in the middle of it ever will. And the shelf life on that parking lot building is, there's a stale date on it, and then after that, not only does it cost you money, but it's now not adaptable to anything else, which is frustrating. And so what we want to be able to do, okay, I'm actually going to just switch to kind of the question is, you know, I've told you what all the problems are, I've told you what all the opportunities are. What do I think the answer is? And so here's my answer, and it's not right. It's a potentially right answer, but I'll give you the sort of thought process I've gone through, and you can tell me where I'm right and where I'm wrong, and we can have that conversation, and that's exactly what we need to do if we're going to solve this problem, right? So, in my opinion, what I think we should do is we should use Wharf Street or Maple Street, preferably Wharf, as a major artery that's going to go in and out of what I call Wellington North or New Wellington or whatever you want to call it, because there's already a really great green space along there. There's a creek that comes down through town and then it winds up, and we're going to have to keep that as the watershed. We're going to have to keep that as the water overflow anyway, and it's already awesome green space, so let's keep it that way. So let's join up with that, and let's use a roadway that is conducive to cycling, walking, and moving cars. But let's not make it a strode. And a strode is an interesting concept that I came across, which is a street that should have been a street, but they've turned it into a road. Think of North Front Street in Belleville, right? So I don't know if you've ever had the displeasure of walking on North Front Street in Belleville, but when I was relating this to my wife, she was like, yeah, I did that once. I parked my car and I tried to walk to the 3 stores that I needed to, and it was a nightmare. So I went back and got my car and drove, 3 stores up and parked it again, because nobody wants to be there. There's no trees, there's no shade from the sun. The cars are flying past you at 80, 90, 100 kilometers an hour, because however big you build the roads is how fast the cars are going to go. The cars are going to go as fast as it's natural to do it. So a lot of places in Europe, what they've done is they've started putting in wider roads for major thoroughfares, and then on their smaller streets, they actually shrink it. And they line them with trees so you can walk there and there's some shade, and by bringing the whole thing in, you can put up as many flashing lights as you want and as many speed bumps and as many slow down signs, but if it's wide open, I'm driving wide open speeds, like you're just naturally going to do it. So what they do is they shrink it down and they create a place that's pedestrian centric, and the cars are actually the afterthought. And by doing that, the cars still move perfectly well through that. And when we're talking about such a small area, we're not talking about losing more than a minute out of your commute, right? But they're safe, and you can walk. We have the hydro station at the top of Wharf Street, which is a major hydro hub, so that's got to stay, right? Like, that's not going anywhere. So let's put a parking lot there. Now we have a centralized parking lot. And the parking lot could service the downtown as well, right? We obviously are desperate for parking in Wellington. We have a bit of a trick here because we do have a lot of seniors, so we need to make sure that those seniors can use their vehicles to access the services that they need. My grandma can't park at the top of Wharf Street, walk to the post office, walk to the grocery store, walk to the bank, walk to the hardware store, and then carry all her stuff back to her car. So we still need on-street parking in the downtown. But a tourist coming into town for the day would be very well served to have a centralized parking lot where they can park potentially for free and then wander about town, because I would bet that if you put a parking lot somewhere in the middle there and then left people to go, they're going to start walking towards the lake, right? The natural attraction is to sort of come down here and see what we've got. And then so once we've sort of got that sorted, what we want to do is run a roadway up it, which is going to be your new main street, and we're going to make that roadway, again, a bit narrower, maybe parking only on one side, maybe some alleyways, because alleyways are actually great, despite the bad reputation they have. And you can add some parking in there, you can do whatever you need to do back there. You could run all your delivery vehicles back there, you can put all your trash back there. And line your street with trees, because it's been identified in everything I've ever been involved with that one of the greatest assets we have in this community is our tree canopy, right? So we're going to line that street with trees, and we're going to make the sidewalks a little extra wide. And so rather than having to take up our parking spots as our cafes spill out onto the street, we're going to actually just have room to have them on the sidewalk, and that makes that a more pleasant place to be. And so now my friend who wanted to move out of her standalone single-family house has turned that house over to a young family who's buying their starter house. She's moved upstairs above a cafe, and now she can wander down and she can get a coffee at the cafe, and she can wander over to the little shop that sells, a few groceries, and she can do that. And she's still part of the community, and she still interacts with a variety of people in a day, and she's still able to sort of lean on people in her community that are her resources if need be. And if we were able to do that, now we've got a really nice new portion of town and a really nice old portion of town, and the things that are really nice about that old portion and the things that are really nice about that new portion are very similar. And then beyond that, the developer can do what developers do in building condo units and townhomes and standalone homes, and they can scatter those throughout the sort of area. But there's a hub, there's a destination, there's a reason to walk instead of drive, there's a place that you want to go and be, and then within those houses you scatter in the opportunity for a corner store, so you don't just make it all single family home sort of thing. You scatter in parks, you scatter in green space. Dan told me about a thing that they do when they're designing an urban setting where they don't ever want it to be more than a 12-minute walk to a park. So you have to have parks scattered in so that no matter where you live, in about 10 minutes you can walk to a park. And I think if we did that, all the things that we love about downtown now exist in the new portion as well. The bad news is, none of that is permissible with the way we write our policy right now, right? You have to have a minimum setback for your road has to be massive, you're only allowed to have houses that fill a certain amount of space, and we prescribe really bad building. The good news is that there are precedents of better built communities like this popping up all over Canada. People are sort of fighting back a little bit because they grew up in those suburbs that their parents said, we don't love living here, but man, it's a great place to raise kids, so we're gonna live here. And what the kids who grew up there found out was, it's actually a really terrible place to live, and it's a really terrible place to raise a kid. One of the gentlemen that I watched the series on YouTube described growing up in London, Ontario, and the closest business that he could walk to from his house was a 45-minute walk across parking lots and a lot of the time no sidewalks down the side of busy roads and stuff, and it was a dry cleaner. So as a 12-year-old, his chance at freedom, his chance at learning sort of about his community was to walk 45 minutes to a dry cleaner. And if he walked an hour and 15 minutes, he could get to a convenience store. And I can't imagine how miserable it would be if we just put a grid of subdivision houses off the north of Wellington, and I live at the very north end of it, and I have a little kid, and my kid has a friend that lives, say where I do on Consecon Street, and they want to go visit, and I'm not around to drive them. What are you doing? Is it a 35-minute bike ride down the side of a busy road for my 12-year-old? Like, that's not what I want. The other thing that I think is really important, and I forgot to mention it, is we have the Millennium Trail running right through the middle of this. We've already done the work, we've invested in it. So it's there for us to adapt properly. We just have to force it to happen. And so the good news on this side of this is that we have this residents association that we've come up with, and there's members of it here, and there's people who would be really good members of it in this room if you would like to sort of go see John when we're done and get signed up. But there are people who are not going to go down without a fight here, and I think that's that's sort of the takeaway for this for me, is that I just came up with all those ideas, and I've been studying to do this, a month maybe? Like, I've been watching some YouTube videos at night, reading up a little bit, having a few meetings, and I probably did a deeper dive into this than most people need to, but I think the ability for this town to defend itself and to sort of develop in the way that we deserve to is there, but we need a unified sort of voice, and we have it, so let's use it. And the last thing I'll leave you with is please go home and tinker with something today. Just change it. That's it.
Thank you, Evan.
You're welcome.
There is a well-known saying that if you want to get something done, you ask a busy person.
Yeah.
And I know Evan is a very busy person in many regards. But you've certainly done it for us to inject passion back into this room, and thank you for it. You hooked me when you started talking about front porches.
Mm-hmm.
After 16 years in the southern suburbs of Allisonville, we'd made many connections with Wellington, and decided Wellington is where we wanted, when we left the country property, we wanted to come to Wellington. Unfortunately, reverted to, and I know a number of you in this room have heard me say this before, but that old dating conundrum where the available is not desirable and the desirable is not available.
That's right.
That's what we found with properties in Wellington at the time. So we reluctantly, initially, went to Wellington on the Lake.
Yeah.
We're quite happy there, but one of the greatest things about our area anyway, in Wellington on the Lake, is the front porches.
Yeah.
They're used a lot, we visit, we've got to know folks better that way.
Wellington on the Lake is a great example of a place that on paper doesn't have sidewalks, it doesn't have the things, the facilities,
Yeah.
It doesn't have a lot of trees, it doesn't have the things that you would want, and the community has nevertheless overcome that to form like a really tight-knit community with lots of things going on, and they've got a community center, and they utilize what they do have to win, right? And I would posit that that's what Wellington can do right now, is continue to win.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
I've been staggered by the lack of sidewalks, but I understand that it's likely you get another 10, 20 houses on the same patch of property.
Well, and if you build a sidewalk, you have to maintain it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, thank you very, very much.